Between March 26th and 30th, 1953, a bloody battle between China and the United Nations Command raged during the Korean War. The battle for Outpost Vegas would go down in history as one of the fiercest confrontations between the East and West after World War II. Vegas was one of 3 outposts, referred to as the Nevada Cities, that were attacked by China's People's Volunteer Army just north of the UN's main line of resistance. As the United States soldiers valiantly held their ground under adverse conditions, a singular hero emerged. As a member of a recoilless rifle platoon, Sergeant Reckless transported ammunition and wounded soldiers through heavy gunfire. The U.S. Marine Corps powerhouse went on to earn 2 Purple Hearts, and even after being wounded, she continued to serve proudly. Even more extraordinary, Sergeant Reckless was a horse. The United Nations couldn't have foreseen an attack in late March. As Korea transitioned into spring, the melting snow flooded roads with mud, complicating logistic capability and the ability to engage the enemy. Despite the terrible weather, 2 main factors were pushing the Chinese to conquest the Nevada cities of Yuncheng County. First, they sought an upper hand to pressure South Korea at peace talks taking place in Panmunjom. Secondly, they wanted the new North Korean state to integrate captured territory into its official borders. The 1st Marine Division was redeployed from Eastern Korea to Western Korea in March of 1952 to defend a 35-mile sector of the main line of resistance. This area, the Jamestown Line, was wedged between Seoul and northern Chinese forces. Marine Corporal Robert Hall would later recall the line as a, quote, messy, rambling series of ditches 5 to 7 feet deep. The formation included the Kimpo Provisional Regiment of the Republic of Korean Army, the 1st Amphibian Tractor Battalion, and the 5th Marines. The 1st Marine Division had support from 3 units providing artillery, tanks, and fighter planes. The 1st Marine Air Wing and its 6,400 members were ready to evacuate frontline casualties and wounded soldiers via helicopters, as well as providing reconnaissance and resupply flights. General Bruce C. Clark wanted to defend the hills north of the MLR as a way of denying the Chinese People's Volunteer Army, or PVA, any tactical advantage. These hills were known as Carson, Reno, and Vegas, collectively the Nevada cities. The highest elevation was Vegas, which sat only 1,380 yards from the UN line. Vegas provided a 180-degree view, covering both enemy and ally positions from its egg-shaped perimeter. Reno wasn't visible from Vegas. The hills served as outposts, with 40 Marines and 2 Navy corpsmen stationed at each one. The Vegas outpost counted on a 250-yard trench surrounding it, with a depth ranging from 4 to 8 feet. Fixed with 2 parallel rows of barbed wire linked by parallel aprons of wire, this method was known as the Canadian system. Still, the position suffered from significant drawbacks because of the irregular slope, from which soldiers found it difficult to fire. During the day, Vegas could attract heavy sniper and artillery fire, forcing troops to hide most of the time. Outposts Carson and Reno differed in its terrain, facing different threats. To the left of Reno, Carson was a barren hilltop with a cave, which served as an impromptu living quarters. A series of bunkers, tunnels, wires, fighting holes, and a trench guarded it. Notably, it provided a good view of Chinese-held Hill 67, perfect for sniper cover. Carson was kept in an oval perimeter, as Vegas. Between Vegas and Carson was Reno, which was considered by military experts the most vulnerable position of the battle. PVA lines were near the hill. Likewise, a ridge forced the perimeter to remain open on one end. A cave also served as living quarters here, and a tunnel connected it to the trench, which oscillated between 5 and 7 feet deep. Reno had no bunkers, making the Marines reliant on digging holes in the trenches. Reno had minimal fields of fire directed at Hill 67 and was vulnerable to any attack from the ridge. Marines at all 3 outposts tossed their empty sea rations at the nearby gullies to serve as a makeshift alarm system of incoming troops. The decorated American warhorse was a Mongolian mare initially involved in racing, purchased from a stable boy for $250 in 1952. Reckless was assigned to the recoilless rifle platoon, anti-tank company of the 5th Regiment from the 1st Marine Division, where Technical Sergeant Joe Latham trained her at Hoof Camp. She was prepared to resist the urge to run from loud noises. Likewise, she got used to running with ammo on her back. Reckless easily integrated into the unit. Many troops felt the horse saw fellow Marines as her herd. The horse would roam around camp freely, even sleeping in some Marines' tents at night. She ate all sorts of human foods. She loved eggs and Coca-Cola. By the end of the war, she'd become so beloved she was promoted to sergeant in 1954, becoming the only animal to reach such a rank in the Marine Corps. Soon after the promotion, a profile on the horse appeared in the Saturday Evening Post, which made Reckless a household name. Activists who read the article began requesting that she be brought to the U.S. like the rest of the Marines. Since the military feared a backlash, they initially refused. Still, a private shipping company named Pacific Transport Lines paid for her journey. She arrived at Camp Pendleton by November. She passed away in 1968, but was buried with full military honors at the California base. The Chinese offensive was launched at night on March 26th. They attacked the 3 Nevada cities outposts and nearby Dotmar, Esther, Bunker, and Hetty outposts. Machine gun fire rained down on the Marines, followed by 15 minutes of non-stop artillery and mortar fire along with the rear positions and supply routes. Then 3,500 PVA charged at the Nevada cities. One of their companies fought the Marines hand-to-hand atop Vegas. In response, the Marines fired protective boxes and proximity fuses. After lighting, they'd run into caves on the opposite sides of their respective hills. They could only re-emerge to keep hold of their defenses once the fuses drove off PVA soldiers. The onslaught of Chinese soldiers overwhelmed the Marines. The outer ring of trenches on Vegas had to be abandoned. As the action unfolded, Marines positioned tanks and artillery to support a raid against the Chinese the next day, codenamed Operation Clambake. Around 40 minutes into the fight, the communications wire between Vegas and the 1st Battalion command post was lost due to rear attacks. From then on, engineers would repair only enough for the next barrage to destroy them once more. An hour into the fight, over 100 Chinese soldiers had taken over the lower trenches of Vegas, shielding them from attacks. The Marines withdrew. However, only an hour later, Marine support arrived. Since the first troops left, the new platoon was ambushed and overwhelmed. 3 minutes before midnight, the 1st Battalion could no longer reach any of the Marines on or near the Vegas outpost. None of them were ever heard from again. 5 hours into the battle, the People's Volunteer Army captured both Reno and Vegas. The F Company 3rd Battalion tried to recapture Vegas, but was unsuccessful. By early morning on March 27th, the Marines retreated to the UN's main line of resistance. The wounded were sent to aid stations or else evacuated by helicopter to Navy hospital ships. The first night claimed 600 Chinese soldiers, while the Marines lost around 150. Reckless played a defining role in the Battle of Outpost Vegas, not only during the first conflagration, but also in the following 4 days of the conflict. As the Chinese relentlessly shot and bombed the 1st Marine Division, Reckless made rounds. Like the Marines, the warhorse held its ground, making 51 round trips through the war zone, crossing rice paddies, and climbing 45-degree steep hills. She fought her flight instinct, relying on her training to deliver 9,000 pounds of ammunition throughout the battle. The mare served to calm shell-shocked and injured soldiers, eventually evacuating wounded Marines down the hill. She was twice bruised by shrapnel, which earned her 2 Purple Hearts. During a trim, she was given flak jackets and shielded 4 Marines as they traveled up the hill. Robin Hutton, author of Sergeant Reckless, America's Warhorse, stated, quote, "Horses are flight animals, but Reckless ran toward the danger because she knew the guys needed her." Among other honors and decorations, Camp Pendleton erected a statue of Reckless in 2016. Major General Edwin A. Pollock ordered air support for Marines. The Air Force was directed to fire at PVA artillery behind their lines and at the fortifications on the captured outposts. March 27th saw more than 60 firefights. While Marines brought out mortars, self-propelled guns, and artillery, more than 24 planes targeted captured outposts Vegas and Reno. Rather than attacking both outposts, Pollock redirected the attacks to Vegas. As the bombardment climaxed, the assault focused on Vegas, and Company D of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines trekked towards the outpost. Unfortunately, the Chinese defenses prevented them from reaching their goal, and only 9 able-bodied soldiers were able to retreat. E Company followed after them, and managed to secure both trenches and the foot of the hill. F Company, 400 yards behind, saw fierce fighting break out. The Marines did their best to recapture the outpost without compromising its defenses. 10 hours of fighting led Marines to eventually conquer the lower slopes, while the PVA held the opposite side. No one was yet in control of Vegas's peak. The following morning, 1st Marine Aircraft Wing spent 23 minutes dropping 28 tons of bombs on Vegas. As evident from the previous night, they wouldn't be able to retake the outposts with PVA defense systems intact. Once afternoon approached, E Company finally took control of the hill and secured it an hour later. By the evening, over 200 Marines were kept in a makeshift hospital on Outpost Vegas. When reports came in that a PVA formation was headed their way, the wounded Marines armed themselves, this time with grenades, which were thrown down the slope to surprise the Chinese. The PVA kept attacking, and the Marines kept pushing them back. By March 30th, PVA lost so many men that they could no longer afford to fight. With the battle over, the 1st Marine Division were rotated into reserve and replaced by the Turkish Brigade. Vegas would only be held until late May, however, when the Chinese launched a renewed Battle of the Nevada Complex. Having adequately delayed the PVA's advance, and in the face of China's apparent willingness to sacrifice as many men as necessary, the United Nations asked the U.S. to abandon the outposts, to stem any further losses.